So as far as I can tell, people's general opinions of The Last of Us Episode 7 seem to be either that it's incredibly sweet and tragic and a wonderful episode, and my god, yes, is it sweet, or the opinion is that it's too straightforward. It's just a short microcosm story of Ellie and Riley that, by the way, the ending here is a mirror opposite to the ending of Bill and Frank's microcosm story, that's worth saying. But yeah, the opinion of the episode is just that, a straightforward story simply to demonstrate A, why Ellie is so afraid of ending up alone, and B, why she absolutely will not leave Joel, even when Joel tells her to, which I think is an important point. But the thing is, I don't think this episode is straightforward. Because you look at it and you realise it isn't just a semi-love story that ends in tragedy, it's also a tale of two children whose lives have been manipulated from the start. So, what do I mean by that? Let's get into it now, alongside some other important ideas, right now. Okay, so we do need to start with the more obvious point, which is that everything Ellie and Riley do in this episode are very much the typical ordinary things kids would do in 2003, except because of the outbreak, all these once ordinary things become otherworldly, almost impossible. This episode feels like the two of them snatching at something beyond perfect, dreamlike, stealing after something so perfect they're not meant to have it, but that something is literally just a childhood. To just be able to hang out in a mall, they have to sneak past dangerous curfews, armed guards, break into a place sealed off from infected, and even if there wasn't infected, this is still literally only one night because Riley has to leave for Atlanta and the two of them are technically on opposing sides now. But visually as well, they do a good job with this otherworldliness, particularly with the carousel, all of its dreamy lights. The fact I think carousels in general, these fixed objects that go round forever on a loop, they do just feel timeless, give off that kind of feeling until, of course, it breaks down and reality then seeps back in. Children have been scarce in this post-apocalypse as far as we've seen. In episode 1 we see one child euthanized and another changed to a radiator. We then proceed to see Joel treating Ellie like an innocent child, the sort of way Sarah was when Ellie is very different from that. In episode 4 and 5 we see Sam hunted like a fugitive, and then only in episode 6 do we see a glimpse of something more ordinarily childlike, let's say, in Tommy's community, where children aren't allowed guns rather than trained to fire them, where they are shown movies and cared for and have their hair cut by maternal figures or read through diaries, a place where they look on a child who has grown up like Ellie has as though she were an alien. So I think all of that context built up over the series before we then go back in time and see Ellie could have had a childhood too, only tragedy tore it away from her. That point might be very loose, but I think it makes this episode more powerful. I think it makes it clearer why Ellie seems a little afraid to belong in Tommy's community and why Joel matters even more. I think that's the case, but there is a bigger point, one that comes when you ask the question, well, why couldn't Ellie have any of these things the kids do in this community? Which is where the idea of Fedra and the fireflies and all of the stuff that separates Ellie and Riley comes into focus, so let's discuss that next, after this.
Ta-da! Shut up!
Hello world! Have you heard of World Anvil? World? Sponsoring this video. World Anvil is an online tool for world building, character creation, campaign building and playing in all of these games, planning and writing your stories, and possibly some other stuff. I just use it for my novel, but it does other stuff too. World building can be difficult, I used to use a folder for different Word documents which seemed simple enough to begin with until things get complex and you end up with a disorganised mess and you suddenly wish you had hyperlinks to different characters or mythologies in your notes, or imagine this, say you want to design your own calendar for your world. You can pop in all the information, have the calendar generated, then build a timeline of historical events linked to that calendar, or several calendars with all sorts of hyperlinks you might want sprawling to other articles, and then upload a map and link different events to locations on the map so you can easily see where and when everything happened. I find that so handy. And if the timeline affects how the map looks, such as a big city getting destroyed or whatever else, you can add altered maps to reflect those changes. And there are other tools as well. This is just the one I find most exciting, especially when it is all surprisingly easy to set up. In all my use of World Anvil so far, I haven't ever bothered to watch any of their tutorials on how to do stuff. I've just got on with it. I have a link in the description and as a pinned comment with the code TREE, which offers you 40% off all their subscriptions. There are different levels and you can even try out the free version initially, so give it a whirl. Take it for a test drive. World Anvil. The fact is, Fedra are trying to keep people safe, as Captain Kwong says.
We're the only thing holding this all together. If we go down, the people in this zone will starve or murder each other, that much I know.
And remembering what we saw happen with Kathleen's gang in episodes 4 and 5, they've got a point, you know? Knowing that breaking into a mall that was deliberately sealed off causes Ellie and Riley to get infected, we can understand why they sealed it off. Everything we've seen of Fedra in this series, quarantine zones that look a bit like slums, where everything is rationed, people are hanged, children are euthanized, curfews and lockdowns are set in place that lead people to somewhat rely on the black markets and smugglers. All of it is ruthless, but important to stop the infection, keep people safe and help humanity survive. Or is it? Perhaps they go too far, you know? Perhaps they are
fascist stick bags,
hell-bent on control. Sure, there's a strong argument extreme measures might have been needed to carve out some safe havens in the early days of the outbreak, but now surely is the time we can think about freedoms and democracy and things again. You know, on the one hand you've got Riley, a member of the Fireflies who champion ideals of liberty, perhaps including the freedom to go down into a mall and experience the childhood pleasures there. At its extreme, such ideals could fall away into anarchy like with Kathleen, or a lack of ordered security on measures that keep people from being infected. And on the other hand, you've got Ellie, who does genuinely seem to side with Fedra here, who champion protection and survival and order, which at its extreme falls away into, fascist stickbags. All of this episode provides an interesting arena to contrast these two factions through the characters of Ellie and Riley, particularly when we haven't known what to think about the Fireflies exactly. You know, I talked in my video on episode 1 about how they almost seem like the good guys initially. We see Fedra kill a child who is very similar to Ellie, who could have been immune like Ellie, where we instead see the Fireflies save and preserve that child. We see images of Fedra's public hanging contrasted with slogans of look to the light, all of which sets up the Fireflies as a real hope for the future, especially when we know Tommy joined them and when we know they're working on a cure. But then we barely hear or see anything from them for ages until we learn Tommy ditched the Fireflies for some reason. That's interesting. And then this episode suddenly makes us question them more directly. Nothing major in Ellie and Riley's discussions, admittedly. There's no winning side in their arguments, but it's just enough to leave us wondering what will happen when and if Ellie and Joel do reach the Fireflies. What if it's not all as hopeful as we've been led to believe? Which could be really important setup here, depending on what happens next in the story. We'll have to see. This is the real point though. The thing is, it doesn't matter what Ellie and Riley argue about Fedra or the Fireflies. None of their arguments get anywhere because neither of them really have any idea. At various points Riley hints how Ellie might not know everything, that there are secrets Fedra have been hiding, that Ellie's indoctrinated, it's all propaganda and stuff, and yet Riley appears to be just as indoctrinated, only on the opposite side. This is what I love so much about this episode. And using the characters of Ellie and Riley to play out some of the arguments between the differing factions of this world, what they're really doing is showing how children are manipulated on both sides, and that's what's really tragic. The episode makes it seem like this is two children with a difficult choice over what they want to do with their lives, but in reality they never really had any choice at all. Be used by Fedra or the Fireflies, be a grunt or an officer. That doesn't sound like a choice. Let me try and explain a little bit more though. It's the introduction of these explosives into the episode. One, it emphasises that despite how confident and self-assured Riley has come across, she isn't quite as grown up as she wants to believe, hence her naive insistence about these explosives.
We would never use them on you or anywhere ever near you.
When that's most likely exactly what they'll be used for. Riley is making explosives to kill people like Ellie, where in the morning Ellie will be training on how to shoot people like Riley. The introduction of explosives here reminds you how serious the decisions are about Fedra or Firefly. All of this talk about which side is good and which is bad, about who has the better flashlights, the fun things Riley is learning from them, or the troubles with Bethany and Carol.
And fuck Carol. Fuck Carol.
The whole episode has felt so dreamlike, but this is still war. Turning 17, Riley is told by Fedra that her posting for possibly the rest of her life is going to be sewage detail. Captain Kwong has already set out an idea of how unpleasant that might be, so she runs away. Gets found by Marlene, who in all likelihood makes a habit of trying to recruit Fedra trainees, and Riley gets pulled in by the allure of the Fireflies being a family. She talks about wanting to belong somewhere. All she's got to do then is to convince herself that the Fireflies are the good guys. And on the other hand, really the best argument set out for Ellie is that if she knuckles down, she will get her own room, beds, eat good food, and won't have to do patrols. These are all kids, most likely orphans, with nowhere to belong, who want something more from life. Of course they do. And yeah, what they want most of all is to belong, and both these camps, Fireflies and Fedra, use that fact to manipulate them. The way Riley talks in this episode makes me think exactly of the way kids get tricked and recruited into gangs. The only real choice either of them get is the choice at the end of this, where Ellie tells Riley not to go. They can't go back to Fedra because Riley has disappeared for the last 3 weeks. Ellie can't go with Riley to Atlanta because Marlene has already said no to that idea, so they don't know exactly where they go or what they do, but it's their decision. Their best answer is,
we're gonna figure it out.
But then they never get the chance. The one time they get to choose something, it's taken away. This episode made me sadder than any of the episodes so far. It might be that I'm remembering badly, but I do think they did a better job here than they did in the game with the subtext around this war and the idea of children being indoctrinated for causes they don't fully understand. All of it also a great insight into the fact Ellie feels like she's never had a parent before. A reminder again of why, as much as Joel might think she's better off without him, why Joel matters to her. Also, final point, best shot of this episode for me is the total awkwardness around Ellie bumping into Riley on the escalator.
Oh shit! Jesus, Ellie! No, I'm good. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. I just tripped.
You can just feel that embarrassment of Ellie trying to impress and worrying she got it a bit wrong and then trying to play it off. It's a really minute thing to pull off in their dynamic, but in general I think there's so many good moments where you can just subtly feel that Ellie has a big crush on Riley but isn't confident with how to express it. Riley is a little more confident.
Nothing, I was just trying to imagine you wearing that.
Shut up!
Considering that they just have one episode together though, the amount of chemistry the two build up here is phenomenal. Also, I am now entirely convinced that my theory back in episode 1 about the colour scheme of red and green in this show is correct. Watch my first video if that intrigues you, otherwise hope you enjoyed this, hope the points I've raised don't feel too unconcluded. But sometimes I prefer not wrapping my videos into proper arguments. Sometimes I prefer just raising ideas and going, these are things to think about. What do you think? So, yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Good or bad? What did I miss or get wrong? What could I have gone further with? Subscribe if you want more. Check out my playlist for other videos on this show or other shows and films and just everything. Support me on Patreon maybe. A big thank you to World Anvil, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Luke Hoare, Tree Chukaba, Michael Gallagher, In Squares, Flying Spider, Samara Salsi, Joshua C. Follier and Jab Bramwell. Thank you.